One.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jeff Mullen. I'm the acting chair of this panel for a comprehensive permit at 582 Blue Hill Avenue. With me tonight is Mr. Frank O'Brien and Ms. Giselle Joffer, members of the Board of Appeals. This is the 10th session of the public hearing that began on December 10th, 2020. Tonight, we're going to be focused on an applicant presentation of some modifications to the proposal that was initially submitted to the board through the Massachusetts Mass Housing, as well as the changes that have come as a result of the peer review that people have heard, the comments from the board, the comments from the neighbors, the comments from other interested parties, as well as ideas that have come up from the applicant itself. So that's the focus of the hearing. Let me also add that we've got with us Ms. Lyon, Martha Lyon, who's our landscape peer reviewer, and Mr. Bomer, who's our site design peer reviewer, or our project architect peer reviewer. And you've heard from Mr. Bomer, the applicant's heard from Mr. Bomer, has not heard from Ms. Lyon, but you do have a copy of the report that she's prepared. We asked her to sit in on this to hear this presentation from you, and I'm going to invite Ms. Lyon at an appropriate time to make some comments to the board and to the audience about her thoughts on the importance of the gardens and the mansion consistent with the letter, if that's okay, Ms. Lyon. So welcome to the board, and we appreciate the work that you've done. So I'd ask that for this introductory portion of the hearing, we just listen from the applicant about what the applicant's thoughts and ideas are, and we can get into some Q&A. But immediately after that, I'm going to ask you, Ms. Lyon, to just give some brief remarks about your thoughts, if that's okay with you, just so you can be prepared. Okay. Now let me catch everybody up. We haven't met since February. I guess it was February 16th. Following that, we postponed a couple of hearings and rescheduled the hearing, the 10th version of this hearing on March. Let me tell people what Gallagher, which is on the file about the sewer issues at the bottom of Meeting House Lane down on Alfred Street. People will remember that testimony. So that I want to acknowledge to Mr. Gallagher that we've received that letter, and I want to ask Winsky on behalf of the board I'm just going to refer that to the town for a response. The letter speaks for itself as to what it seeks, but it did ask, Mr. Gallagher did specifically ask in that letter that the board ask the town to take a look at some of the things about which he is concerned. And at an appropriate time, when we get back to the water and sewer, we'll pick this issue up again. But Mr. Zawinski, I just wanted to alert you to that request that the board has made or through me right now. Okay. We also got a letter from Mr. O'Donnell at the Mass Historic Commission, from the Milton Historic Commission, who spoke at this hearing and has submitted to us some historical information. So that's in the record. And lastly, we got a letter from Mr. Kevin Donahue about his concern of water on the back slope of the hill. So I wanted to acknowledge the receipt of each of those pieces of correspondence. Lastly, we did receive Ms. Lyon's peer review, for which I'm very appreciative, and I know I speak for the board in saying that, for the time that she put into that, and for lending to the board her expertise. So as I said earlier, we've asked her to sit in on this, and at appropriate time we'll hear from her, but I wanted people to know that her peer review report has also been added to the record. So I think that catches us up on where we were when we last left this hearing on February 16. I'm going to ask my colleagues, Mr. O'Brien and Ms. Joffer, if they've got any preliminary remarks they'd like to make before I ask Mr. Schumer to make his presentation.
Good evening. No preliminary remarks from me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
None here either, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Schumer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to you and to the other members and to members of the public and the town's peer reviewers and consultants. We're here tonight, hopefully, to take the first step in the next phase of this process. It's been a long road so far, and we've got a ways to go. but the last few hearings, as the board knows, have been devoted to peer review, and for the most part, our response to that has been to listen and to provide perhaps what is an unsatisfying response of saying that we're listening and we'll take that under advisement and respond to you at the appropriate time. And I have to imagine that at this point, my face and D'Artagnan's face might be on a fair number of dartboards around the town of Milton. But I'm hopeful that tonight is the next step to move in the direction of fulfilling the commitments that we made to the board from the first night of this hearing and to the community to be responsive as we can to the community's concerns, and to come up with a project that is as close as possible to the best outcome for all involved. And I think we've hit on a very good design tonight, and we're looking forward to presenting it to the board. From the peer review, from the board members' comments, from the comments of the neighbors, and from other members of the town departments, such as the fire chief and Mr. O'Donnell, head of the MHC, we've heard that there are a number of concerns that the town has, and those focus on several specific areas, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, some of them being issues relating to the drainage and stormwater, issues relating to traffic, although I think those were fairly well addressed by Mr. Dirk's peer review. But primarily the concern that we were hearing from the neighborhood, from the board, and perhaps most emphatically by the town's peer reviewer, Mr. Bomer, whose review was very helpful, and his feedback was invaluable to our design of this. The concern regarding the historic preservation of the garden and the existing house on the site. Following Mr. Bomer's presentation, we went back as a team and had a frank discussion and a hard look at the project and what we could do to respond to these concerns. And I think tonight I hope the board will agree that we've made a good effort to try to do that. So I'll turn it over to D'Artagnan, but just to give a brief overview of what we've proposed to do, and D'Artagnan will show you in a moment. We've proposed a fairly significant redesign of the project. It would contemplate the single building being split into two buildings, one of which would project off of the existing mansion house, which would be preserved intact for the most part, except for one side of the structure, which would be built into the new building. There would be a second building at the front of the site, and the existing historic gardens would be preserved in their entirety without any touch to that facility. The project would also come with a significant reduction in density and massing, with a reduction of units from 118 to 92, which is a reduction of over 20% in the unit count. And that would come with a corresponding reduction in the amount of traffic, impervious surfaces, and other similar site intensity considerations that have been raised by Mr. Bomer and by others. So with that having been said, I'll turn things over to D'Artagnan for him to get into the nitty gritty, and we look forward to the board's feedback tonight. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, peer reviewers, D'Artagnan Brown, architect with Embark. I think Jesse kind of hit some of the high levels, and I was hoping it wouldn't steal the thunder, but I wanted to really take a moment to step back and say, I think for us as architects working on this site, it's a very unique site with the existing structure and the magnificent gardens. Typical 40B sites that we look at don't have such a grandeur to them coming in. And I think going through this process, working, hearing both comments back from the board, from the neighbors, having the pleasure to kind of sit down with Cliff, talk through in more detail. Martha, we look forward to hearing your report as well. But I'm hopeful tonight, will really be a reflection of maybe one of the biggest pivots that we've seen as architects on a 40B site. At this point in the process, and as Jesse mentioned, I think we really took a step back, had great dialogue internally amongst our clients, our landscape architects, civil, and we have a presentation tonight that I think is going to address a lot of the comments raised. With that, let me see if I can share a screen. Can everyone see that? That's coming up? Yeah,
Yes.
okay, great. So just by, sorry, I'm Zoom voiced out today. Just by refresh of where we were at. So this is kind of the previous concept plan. A quick reminder of the proposed building, kind of ingress, egress up on page north here, coming to a 4-story structure over kind of parking that's tucked into the hill. And then it's stepping down in 3 stories to scale with a continuous loop road and then egress back onto Blue Hill. This was kind of a massing diagram from the earlier schematic in terms of how we were looking at positioning the site. Again, you can kind of see the scaling of the structure relative to Meeting House Lane. Even though we're working with the topography on the site, we understood a lot of the challenges that arose out of this project. And essentially what we've done here is summarized what we think are the biggest concerns that have been raised during this process to date over the last 10 meetings, as was noted. And so just running off in no particular order, but in our minds, kind of, very prominent issues that have been risen is the preservation of the gardens. We know the value around those. Preservation of the existing house. After many of the neighborhood walks and kind of stepping back and looking at the grandeur of the house, working with our clients, we do realize the value of that home is unlike really any other that's on, other 40B sites that we've worked with. In addition to that, along Blue Hill Ave, kind of the preservation of those really mature trees that line Blue Hill Ave. And then also things that came up during the site visit was increase of the side yard buffers so that we can ensure ample screening between our project and abutting properties. And then just the overall massing and density approach to the site, transition down to the neighbors, both south, east, and west. And then how do we mitigate around kind of that exposure of the garage facade? Other items that came up were just the concern around, very valid concern around school bus drop-off, pickup safety off of Blue Hill Ave, as we do understand that that's a very active, quote unquote, highway. In addition to that, and more of the finer details, loading and vehicle drop-off locations, stormwater management, how do we manage and get around retention on site, understanding also the topography down to from Blue Hill Ave down to Meeting House Lane. And then other finer details, as I was mentioning, just around trash, bike storage, maintenance, and stuff that typically we would maybe denote a little bit earlier, but very valid concerns, and we wanted to make sure we address those. So a quick summary, and again, tonight's goal is really to summarize an overall approach without really getting too much into the finer details, but really just a pivotal strategy and change for massing and how we look at this site going forward. So what you can see here is coming off of Blue Hill Ave, we've kind of really reworked this so that the main portion of the historic home, literally 90% of it, except for the small wing that's off to page east here, is fully preserved, with the idea that the house would go through, it's in actually very good shape, but would go through exterior historic preservation. And then that would almost become the main stage to 2 buildings that flanked left and right around a central courtyard. So the idea that you would come in, there's visitor drop-off space, a roundabout, be able to drop off residents. This is what we're calling the west building. I'll get into more details around this. And then the north building, where the density and height really goes from a 4 to a 3 and a 2-story as we feather into the residential neighborhood, page south. And with this as well, allowing to increase the buffer between us and Delphi, and as we have in the past, stay out of the 100-foot setback buffer here. And then the main really gem of this kind of repositioning is, in addition to the preservation of the home, is the entire preservation of the magnificent gardens. So this is getting more into a little bit of an architectural site plan. So the idea here, what we're looking at, and I'll just kind of run page clockwise, is this idea of creating a new sidewalk along Blue Hill. And with that, we can create a pull-off zone for bus drop-off and pick up for kids. Again, we'll get into the detail on how it works from a circulation pattern, but the idea that there's a moment to be able to pull off load. In addition to that, because we've been able to reposition parking, we can save the majority of the existing mature trees along Blue Hill. As I mentioned, we'll have a space for 7 or so visitor handicap spots drop off. You pull into this roundabout courtyard. This is the west building, as I was mentioning. The existing building in red, and then the new north building flanking page right. As you loop around, so the idea is we've been able to pull off holistically, removing kind of that large garage structure and mitigating against that garage facade by really working through a combination of parking underneath the building, which we'll show you, and then also some surface parking, but mindful of the berming and screening and landscaping to mitigate against other additional details around circulation, headlight disturbance. So those will certainly come in due time. But the main thing here is we've been able to, by reworking the site plan, also allow for stormwater retention areas amply on site that will address a lot of the peer reviewers' concerns around how that was going to be managed. And so you can see here kind of in the red again is the existing historic structure, which we would renovate. And then this outlines the existing gardens, which would remain intact. Working through, again, a series of plans here. So as we come down with the topographic change, we pull into the garage, starting to work through some utility points of entry off of Blue Hill, trash room storage, being able to pull off managed trash, bike storage, maintenance. And then really below this kind of central courtyard, we would have really a continuous garage that housed 77 parking spaces within the garage, and then on the surface 61. So for the 92 units that kind of are dropped from the 20% drop from the prior, we're going to house over 50% of the parking within the building. As we move up through the building, the idea with the main first floor of the existing home is to use that as the amenity base for the building. And by tapping our new kind of north wing, we can service with full ADA accessibility, elevators to tap down into the garage. And then from there, we have the mix of the 1, the 2, and then the 10% of the 3 bedrooms as well. So as we move up the building, what you'll see in the upper, kind of the upper stories of it's really a 2 plus the kind of attic on the existing house would be a couple units. And then as the buildings, as this building goes up in through the rest of the floors, you'll see we're really stepping back and pulling back, and we'll show you a couple kind of aerial views, but that's really to address a transition into the residential neighborhood. So just a quick couple, again, diagrammatic, but really I think useful at this point to understand the existing structure here. Really the ground floor is the amenity, the ability for that amenity to spill out onto the existing gardens. This is the section coming up from Blue Hill here. So I think everyone's had a chance to walk the site, but if you recall kind of looking back as we're walking down towards Meeting House Lane, looking back at that existing home, which would be preserved, with really the backdrop left and right of the new additions to the site. We haven't really gotten into the architectural aesthetic yet, but the idea is to shift away from what we had before and really have something that's complementary but secondary to the existing vernacular of the historic home. So the idea that we play off maybe a kind of a cleaner take, and we look forward to those discussions, but getting away from kind of the traditional approach that we had before, but something that really lets this historic home kind of be the jewel of the site, and then flanking left and right kind of secondary to that, which will require careful articulation, but something I think we're personally excited to do in terms of how we position the new kind of build that flanks the existing historic structure. And so I think with that, Mr. Chair, we're personally excited to do this. I think right after we had the last meeting, I want to just give credit to Dan on our team. He really jumped in it over the weekend and came up with a flurry of sketches on how we preserve the structure. So I think the inherent enthusiasm is there to be able to really look at a pivot for the site and come up with something that we think will address a vast majority of points and concerns raised to date. Thank you. I think, Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
On mute, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Schomer, is that the extent of the presentation?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let me ask the members, my fellow board members, if they've got any questions of the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have, I think, one comment and one question. I guess the first comment is to state the obvious. This is a huge change. It's like more of a backflip than a pivot. So thank you for listening to the comments of the board and the community. I think this is appreciated. I do need some time to sort of digest it and think back to the concerns we had. One that came to mind, though, was snow storage, or a location for snow piles, and that's something we were hoping could be indicated on the site. And I'm wondering if, understanding that this is sort of a new idea, you've given that any thought?
Yeah, thank you, Giselle. Absolutely. So I think a couple of the differences here, maybe from the prior scheme, is around the entire site, especially walking this whole Page North area on Blue Hill Ave. There's a lot of great snow storage during severe conditions that would require it up through here. So the majority of the drive clearing off for kind of safe access to the main front of the existing house, we could easily accommodate under the massive tree canopies along Blue Hill. And then the idea too that as you all know, this is kind of set up to allow not only site circulation, but full access for fire, life safety. And we do have again, Page North on our side up to the existing garden wall, a lot of area to work with there as well. And then I think further along, should those, and I definitely defer to engineers, and when the timing is right, we'll be able to address it in a more definitive way. But beyond that, if we had the need to do offsite, we would. But I think just based on kind of the reconfiguration of the site, we'd be able to safely, what's the right word? Safely accommodate on our site for that.
Thank you. That's it for me for now.
Mr. O'Brien.
I think, Mr. O'Brien, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Brown. I would agree with my colleague. This is quite the change, and it's going to take a little bit of time to digest. I think I'd like to hold my questions until a later time.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I wonder, Mr. Brown, what this does to the water and sewer plan and the drainage issues that have been so prominent in this hearing.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, excellent question. I think, we understand that this is quite a massive pivot. And as I mentioned earlier, something I think that's, a truly unique change for the approach on this site. We did, before we even presented this to the group, understood the challenges around civil and site water management. And so our civil engineer, who's online, we've worked through kind of very high level an approach to mitigating against that. And I think tonight's goal is really to kind of give a preview of what's to come and kind of a re-strategizing of the site. And then we'd certainly follow through with a full set of updated engineering drawings, peer reviewer. But we're very confident based on initial discussions we've had with our civil engineer that we'll be able to accommodate and address concerns that have been raised to date, just based on the restructuring. Because a lot of it, and just to reiterate, with the preservation of the gardens, we're eliminating all of the garage below, which before was all impervious. In addition to the pervious nature of the gardens itself, we have now all of this kind of exposed right to earth that now can become great on-site. Let me actually flick back a couple pages here. We've outlined in blue here, working with civil, that allows us to get the necessary on-site water through the Celtic chambers and on-site chamber processes to answer that. So we are very comfortable that again, tonight is really about just high-level architectural massing shifts. We'll catch up with all of our consultants in the various trades to be able to come back and address those.
Fair enough. It's not clear to me that the impervious nature of the site is markedly different. So I think it would be helpful to have some type of comparison.
Yeah.
The old and the new. The fact that we call the red building a mansion and it looks pretty small on this site plan reminds me of how big these other buildings really are. So, there are going to be some questions around that. Let me ask you, on the site circulation, have you given thought as to entry and exit and how that might work?
We have, and what we'd like to do, and I'm going to defer to our traffic consultant, but right now the kind of circulatory road is set up to allow for two-way traffic, because we do hear comments and concerns around, and very valid, around having everything come off of Page North here. So I think either Dan or on our team, I don't know if we're prepared to maybe give a thorough answer on tonight, but we are looking at that, because that was something that was, as significant as maybe some of the massing strategies. But right now, with the 20-foot that's required for the fire truck life safety, 24 gets us to a two-way. So this design has allowed flexibility for that to occur.
I see.
If that answers it, or I don't know, Dan, if we have anything else to add on that end.
No, that's one of the details we're still working through. But as D'Artagnan mentioned, this is currently designed for two-way traffic all the way around, or to allow for two-way traffic all the way around the site. And we're working with the civil engineer and the traffic engineer to really fine-tune that. And it's great to have them on board during this process and planning, and to have gathered all the information that we have so far. So that'll help us make a really informed answer when we have our full presentation later this month.
Thank you. Okay, so I understand there's a lot of details coming. I just give you some, initial feedback. I have one more question and then I'll move the meeting. But when you say the gardens are going to be preserved, does that mean that people are going to be able to see them and visit?
From a public realm or from a residential
Both,
on-site basis?
both.
I'm going to pass the torch as the architect on to Jesse, if you don't mind.
Well, maybe you don't even need to answer the question. I'll just.
That's a
ask
great
the
question. I mean, it's definitely going to be to the residents. I don't think we've addressed yet if there's a public time or.
Okay. All right. Let me ask. There are no further questions at this time from the members, except for Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Took me a couple of minutes to think up a couple, and let's just stay at this particular slide for the moment, slide A4. So my first question is, where's the entrance to the garage on this? Is it where it was last time?
Yeah, correct. Can you see my mouse, Frank?
Yes.
Yeah, it's right there.
Okay. And I'm a little confused. What is the main entrance to the complex, to the two buildings, off of that tree in the circle? Or is the main entrance to the building in the mansion? Not clear to me.
Yep. So we will have multiple entries. So off of the courtyard here, the idea is that this west building will have a building lobby entry to elevator off of the courtyard. It will also have direct access from the garage. So the idea, depending on what resident was in what building, we assign parking, so if you lived in the west building, it'd be parking closer to this end, access in. And then on this end, again, access in. So at the lower level, there's a residential kind of garage level lobby. And then the main, this we consider as part of the main building would come off of courtyard into amenity. You have on-site management, leasing, amenitized, and then that really ties into the main building here. So really 2 points of entry.
Okay, so we'd have to work out, if this was the direction to go, and we'd have to work out some of the amenity related items like deliveries and stuff like that. That gives me a better idea in terms of citing myself. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Barrett, is there anything you'd like to add for the board at this time?
No, I'm going to reserve my comments for a bit. I actually would prefer to hear the peer review consultants and whatever other questions the board has.
Okay, Ms. Lyon, would you mind let me introduce members to Ms. Lyon, Martha Lyon, who is the peer review expert who runs a planning and design firm in Northampton, I believe.
Correct.
Northampton, and is an expert in historic gardens and preservation, and has offered to us a letter, which we appreciate. I wonder if, and is with us tonight, thank you. I wonder if you might make offer the board some remarks on your observation about the site, the home, the gardens, et cetera, just in a general matter, or whatever you'd like, but I think it'd be helpful to hear a little bit of an overview from you, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm assuming that the members of the board have seen the letter.
Yes.
And okay, but the members of the public have not, correct?
They could have. We've posted it.
Okay. I thought what I'd do is just give you some highlights of this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can. I was asked to take a look at this property, given what was being proposed for it, and specifically do a few things. One is to confirm the historical significance of it, and also look at what we call the integrity, meaning how much of it is intact, how much of the history is still there, spoken in very simple terms. Look at the proposed development. So that would have been the previous design, and then finally propose some options for preservation. And I do believe there are several here. So just a little bit about the significance of this. I think all of you have read the comments from the public and also from Stephen O'Donnell from the Historical Commission. This is a rare example of the work of Alan Biddle Shipman, who worked at the beginning of the 20th century. This was created in 1925. It was created as a private space by a wealthy individual, and it really does represent the tastes of the wealthiest Americans at that time in history. She was one of the first women to practice in the field, so women in the profession today look to her as one of our pioneers, very highly regarded. And I think that, again, of a scholar of landscape history and a professional designer, this kind of landscape is important because it's instructive for those wanting to learn about how landscapes were devised and thought of and put together at a different time. So that's very important. She also had a lot of skill with human scale, I would say. So she understood how humans interact with the landscape and feel comfortable in it, and what stimulates their senses. And that's all something that we as students learn and try to carry with us through our profession. What I will say about this is that it was designed as a composition. So we talk about the garden, and I think a lot of people just think about what's inside those walls. And the fact of the matter is her work extended way beyond those. She actually designed the whole property. And there are records of that in the Cornell University archives. All of her drawings are there for this property. There are 57 of them. And so she not only designed this garden, the walls, all of the plantings, the pool, the fountains, she also designed the entry gates, the gate posts. She designed the road layout and the profile of it, the service court, a path to a tennis court, which is no longer there, the drainage system, and then multiple planting plans for all of those different areas that I just described. So it's really a larger composition. And the other thing too is that she often worked in tandem with architects, and the gardens became extensions of the house. So you think of the house as an enclosed structure. The walled area is also a structure too. It just doesn't have a roof on it. So it's almost like an outdoor room, and it's a continuation of the architecture. And that is all conceived of very deliberately. I will say that on my inspection the day I went, and I want to just, there's a caveat to that it was quite snowy. So there wasn't a lot, I couldn't see everything, but what I could see was that there have been several alterations to Shipman's design since the time of its construction, and then also Mrs. McGinley, who owned this property originally and hired Shipman since the time of her death in 1967. So just some of those things that are no longer there. One of the most important features is the views to the Blue Hills to the south and east. The walled garden especially was designed oriented that way so that you would see this beautiful vista. We call that the borrowed landscape in the profession. It's been obstructed now because there have been construction of houses and other development in the middle ground of that view. The other things that had changed, there were many mature trees on the property when the garden landscape was designed, and most of those are retained. And they embraced the walled garden area. So a number of those are gone, mostly probably because of age. There were grass and paved terraces on the east side of the house, adjacent to the house. And in 2001, those were removed, and a swimming pool and I believe a spa or a whirlpool was built in that place. Don't know what the long-term plan is for that, but that's what's there now. There was also a pool house or changing rooms, a pergola, that all appear to be part of that 2001 addition or modification, as well as a set of steps that can cascade down to the east lawn. And what is called the carriage house now, which is really a garage, was also built around that time. So it's kind of a modern day carriage house, I guess you would say. Recently, the property was restored. Apparently, the garden area, the walled garden area. However, the owners understandably brought in less maintenance and intensive shrubs, trees, and perennials as part of that effort. So that's a snapshot. And as I said, there may be other things that I just couldn't see because it was a snowy day. So I'm not going to comment on the earlier design. I would suggest, though, moving forward, if whatever gets done here, if elements of Shipman's design are retained, I would absolutely suggest that her archives be looked at to see if any of the plant material that she specified for this property could be reinstalled. Now, that said, there are a lot of plant materials that are no longer available. So that has to be taken into consideration, but that's a suggestion. So what are the options for preserving, given all that I've just said? One thing that I think is going to be very important moving forward, regardless of what happens here, is that a permanent record of this property be made. And I would also suggest this for the house, if that has not been done. So what that means is developing a collection of photographs, drawings if they exist, and we know they do for this garden, organizing them and entering them, in the case of the landscape, into the Historic American Landscape Survey. That is similar to the Historic American Building Survey. It's a collection that is housed at the Library of Congress, so that information about the gardens, the landscape, will be available to the public, in perpetuity. Very important. In redesigning the property, there have been obviously some advances made on this since the last meeting that you had and what I saw. I just want to caution that, remember, this garden and landscape was really designed and built for a single lady who lived on this property with her and had her social circle involved. She had a full-time estate gardener. So the impact of, in this case, I guess you said 92 units of housing with families and pets and kids, we know how they impact. There's going to have to be some serious thought given to how that population, that large population, interacts with this garden that was really meant to be a private space. And it's very, it's fussy. It has a lot of detail to it. There are a lot of pieces of it that I wouldn't call them fragile, but they're going to take a lot of tender, loving care over the long term, especially as they age. And then the other option, of course, would be to resell the property. One thing that has to be considered with that is if this property were to be resold to another entity, individual, without some kind of preservation restriction on it, this garden could be completely removed, and we would never know. So in order to really protect this over the long term in its state as it is now, it needs to have a preservation entity involved and a restriction put on it if that's what's desired. So just in closing, I just want to say, and this is my final thought in preparing this letter, I worked on the master plan for Milton back in 2014, so I have a little background information about this. Preservation movements are often very frequently begun following a tragic loss of some kind of building or landscape. And so that presents an opportunity here, I think, for the town to really look at this property, and maybe there are others like this, I know there are, and really think in a very constructive and progressive way about what's going to be done in the future. Because, this may be a loss, and if that's something that people are so concerned about, they really need to get out front of that. And there are several preservation tools that are outlined in the master plan that I would urge the town to go back and revisit as they move forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, thank you, Ms. Lyon. Appreciate that. I wonder if my fellow board members have any questions. on what we've just heard.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sure, Brian.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Lyon, for your thoughtful presentation. I noticed in your letter that you mentioned that the drawings and other materials, I believe it was at Cornell, are not digitally available. So you didn't actually review her drawings, did you?
I did. I reviewed a plan that has been reprinted in a number of publications. So I think there's a footnote in the letter that tells exactly what it is. And there are two books that were written by Judith Tankard. Each of them have a copy of that in it. And also there's another book that I have that has it as well.
Thank you. One of the key issues in this project in the past has been and remains drainage issues. So my ears perked up a little bit when you mentioned that the original plan included drawings relative to drainage. Are those plans readily available as well, or I should say drawings readily available?
So those are in the archive at Cornell. And I think there's no reason why the town, whoever could contact the special collections there and see what arrangements could be made to view them.
Thank you, Ms. Lyon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Joffer.
Thank you, Ms. Lyon, for a fascinating presentation. I found it helpful. I know that you're just viewing this new design for the first time. Do you have any initial reactions to how it impacts sort of the preservation, the ideal preservation situation? I guess maybe the ideal would be nothing at all, but do you have any reactions to, for example, how the buildings align with the house, the positioning? Any thoughts that might be helpful? Thank you.
Given that it took me it took me a lot of time to construct this letter because it was a very complicated situation that I had to compose a succinct narrative around. I think I'll reserve comments on it until I see more information. Just one thing I would caution about the height of that building on the west side. That's going to produce a lot of shadow in the garden. And so not to say that it's going to ruin it, but a lot of consideration will have to be given to what actually goes into the garden to accommodate the shade, because you'll be basically creating a shade garden at least part of the year, and that's tricky to deal with. I have one in my own house, so I know it's a pain. And then this was a comment I had about the last plan, and Cliff, I don't think I saw this in your memo. Is where are the dumpsters going? Because this is a lot of people and a lot of garbage, and garbage trucks are not the most gracious vehicles, both in their bulk and also the way they move around and the way they kind of plow in and throw stuff around. So that's something would have to be given some consideration, because I don't think they're going to go into the garage. I would doubt it. Maybe, but I would just urge you to think about that. And then I would reserve comments until I have more information.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Mr. Schumer, any questions at this point? Anything else to add? Or anybody from your team have any questions of Ms. Lyon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My ears pricked up at the same time. It sounds like Mr. O'Brien's did regarding the drainage plan. I'm curious about that as well. I know that Blair Hines is on the line. He's our landscape architect, so I'll defer to him in case he has any questions. And thank you very much, Ms. Lyon, for your presentation. Very informative.
Mr. Hines.
I have no questions.
Mr. Bowler, is there anything you'd like to share with us at this time?
I would, and I think all of you know that I did have a discussion with D'Artagnan. It was a week ago yesterday, and I don't think anything has changed, maybe a little bit from what I was shown at that time. And I think I want to say that for me, the direction of this current scheme is really encouraging. I'm really strongly encouraged by it because it is driven by a desire. There is a preservation idea behind it, and I totally support that. I think the organization of the buildings, their respect for the geometry of the existing building, their preservation of significant trees on Blue Hill Avenue is really important. So I think that site organization for me is good. I've had a little more time to think about it than you folks. So if you don't mind, I would offer some suggestions of how to keep this flowing in the right direction from my perspective.
Please.
I think that design is always an iterative process, and we always learn from studying the images that we make. And particularly if you're trying to drive home an idea. And in this case, I think the developer has really taken on the idea of creating, shipment homes or whatever they may call this. And I think that I would push that further. And building a little bit on what Martha said about scale of buildings, I think right now there are a couple of uncomfortable moments for me, and then probably one more significant change that I would recommend looking at. The big change, or the big study for me would be, I think the north building extends too far to the west. So for a couple of reasons, I think from a site access perspective, it looks as though the two buildings are about 80 feet apart, something like that. And the courtyard is tight. I think it's very tight. And if you imagine emergency vehicles coming and even just being able to negotiate that space, it's a great idea. I love the idea of a kind of landscape courtyard where delivery of people happens. That's a terrific notion, and I think really elegant solution. But for me, the north building is too long in that direction. I think that if that were trimmed back, it would open up views of the historic building, and I think also really help site circulation. Again, it's just pushing more towards respecting the historic nature of the property. And I think what's happened and why it's important to look at this iteration at least is that by preserving context, then kind of the next step is what we always do, which is thinking about mitigating the impact of the new buildings on the context. And so for me, the massing of the bar buildings, and I appreciate the notion of making them secondary, but at the moment, I think they're really overpowering the mansion. So at the very least, I think improving the view of the mansion. I'm also a little nervous about what the actual connection between the mansion and the new building is, how that works on that side. It almost feels like there should be some space there to help preserve the integrity of the historic building. But overall, to Martha's point, I'll comment on that too, that it's sort of the same. It's a little bit close, and it certainly is a taller building. The garden does have a good southern exposure, but the afternoon light will definitely will be impacted by the height of that building. I think another comment that Martha made is a good one, and all of it was excellent. And something that resonated with me was keeping that garden for passive recreation of the residents of the building is a terrific idea, and clearly using it as a dog park or as a place for kids to play Frisbee is not going to work, which I think leads to comments that were made previously about the lack of defined usable outdoor space for more active use, whether it's a tot lot or just an open field where kids can kick a soccer ball around. Just a couple other comments. I'm a little confused by why that road that goes all the way around needs to be a two-way road. And just in general, it seems like an awful lot of paving. And I think if that north building were diminished in scale, then maybe some of the parking spaces can go away and still preserve the same kind of parking ratio. So, only because I've had a little more time to think about it, I have some comments. So in my opinion, the most productive use of the designer's time at this point would be to continue to push that idea. They've done the right, in my opinion, they've really done the right thing by splitting up the building. They're really making an effort to respect the integrity of the existing building, and obviously the preservation of the garden is terrific. But I'm feeling like the building that is supposed to be the centerpiece and really the jewel of the development it's too secondary at this point. So those are my preliminary observations. I think the scale of particularly the north building needs to be looked at.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Let me ask if Mr. Hill or Ms. Baptista are here.
I don't believe they are, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Let me ask if there's anybody in the audience who'd like to ask a question of the applicant or of our peer reviewer for the landscape. Mr. Zawinski, does Mr. Zawinski have a comment before I open it up?
Dan Hill.
Oh, he's here?
Yes.
Mr. Hill is here. Mr. Hill.
Okay,
I'm here.
there he is.
Mr. Zawinski, we'll get to you after Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologies for being tardy. I'm seeing this for the first time, as I assume everybody else is. So, we're going to reserve our judgment and comments until we can actually see the full set of site plans. The initial comment, we share our appreciation with Mr. Bomer that this is definitely in the right direction. However, I think there's still a lot of improvement to be made. It's still too much on the site. It's too dense, and certainly there's room for improvement. And we actually submitted a proposed site plan on February 4th to the applicant, which is somewhat similar to this, but fewer buildings and smaller buildings. So we would encourage the applicant to keep going, and we look forward to seeing the full set of plans.
Fair enough. Thank you. Mr. Zawinski.
Did we lose him?
He's got his hand up. I don't understand why. I thought he was a panelist.
Me too. I thought I saw his name on the panelist group.
Oh, he's rejoining. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I got bumped earlier, and I went back into the participant room. Sorry about that. Judy, I might have texted you about that.
You did. I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chair, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity. The best I can do right now is, I think, echo Mr. Bomer's comments. I think this is a real serious step in the right direction. And I think that, you know, we're very much appreciative of the applicant's intake of our comments and what they've heard through the public hearing. We'll definitely be interested in some of the more detailed analysis of changes to the stormwater drainage plan, and some of the ongoing iteration of the design. But I think, you know, the preservation of the gardens, the preservation of most of the main house, I think are serious steps in the right direction. I think, you know, in that regard, the applicant should be applauded, and we'll see if we can continue to applaud them or if we need to do a little bit more work. So thanks again for the opportunity, and we'll keep an eye out for additional materials.
Thank you, Mr. Zawinski. May I ask if there's any members in the audience who have questions, comments?
Not right now.
Ms. Lyon raised her hand.
I just have one comment that I do want to make about that building and buildings. I just would urge the architects to think about, well, I think that oftentimes historic buildings are, their beauty and their originality is enhanced if what's built around them is, you know, more contemporary. It doesn't try to, what's built around them doesn't try to mimic them. And I just would urge you to give that some thought.
No, thank you, Martha. That makes a ton of sense. And we're glad to hear that, because I think our take would be to do something that's a little bit more modern or plays off of some of the historic main datum lines in the house, but we're not trying to replicate the existing house. And if anything, that really helps showcase, you know, the existing structure. So excellent comments, and we'll be running with that.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Is there anybody else who has a comment, a question at this point in the hearing?
No attendees.
Mr. Lavash.
Oh, Mr. Lavash, yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I want to echo what some others have said tonight. I just want to say that I think from the neighbor standpoint, I really appreciate the effort here to save the house and gardens. As an architect, I want to say, yeah, I'm a little bit concerned, similar with Cliff. When I walked the site, the driveway that's coming around the north building, it's very close to the Delphi Academy driveway. And so I think what you had said, Cliff, like pushing it back, for me right now, the new massings are overshadowing the current mansion. The mansion's quite large. We know what the size of the mansion is. And I think what Martha said as well, we do a lot of historic preservation as well. And we always are challenged by, we never really want to replicate, historic structures again. And so I do think that that's a very good comment, Martha. And so I would say, yes, this is a good step in the right direction. But let's look at, the overall size of these buildings on the site, and as well as that north part of that north building, where that driveway comes around, and also I think just the parking on this site as well. I'm still, I would love to see the way the site drainage and everything. Has that been a step in the right direction here? Because I'm still concerned with that. The site drops down a lot and in the on the back end of the property, and we're getting really close to that back end of the property too. And so, I think there's a little bit more, I know this is a first step, D'Artagnan, but I do appreciate, and with the help of Cliff, it's a step in the right direction. But we have ways to go there. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Mr. Lavash. Mr. Brown, did you want to say something?
No, I just want to say thank you, Rob. We appreciate those comments, and we look forward to moving this along and getting into more of the finer details. We understand, I think, comments around the north wing of the north building, and we'll certainly be taking all of this in, and as we've done over the last 2 weeks and weeks to come ahead, we hope to keep pushing it in the right direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Ms. O'Donnell from the Planning Board. Welcome.
Kathleen, you need to unmute.
I did hit the wrong button. There we go. I just wanted to say the planning board had provided comments on the prior design. And so we will be interested to see the iterations and further explanations of this new one, and would come back to the board with a revised letter.
That would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Anybody else have a question, comment at this point?
No more hands.
Let me ask Mr. Schumer what the board is to expect from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What we would propose from this point, basically what we were hoping tonight was to stop and ask directions from the board members. Are we headed in the right direction, or you can't get there from here? And I think what we're hearing from the board members and from the members of the public, that we are headed in the right direction. I think that this is, in the broad strokes, this is the plan that we will be moving forward with. So we will need some time to set the engineer and the landscape architects and the traffic engineers forward in terms of catching up with these plans and redesigning the site to match this architecture and site design. So what we would propose is to come back to the board with full redesign plans for the architecture, engineering, traffic, and landscaping, and do a full presentation on this on March the 24th. And we would, of course, file those plans with the board in advance of those hearings, so that you'll have an ample opportunity to review them in advance of that. We feel that would be sufficient time for us to redesign this and address some of the comments that we've heard tonight, and hopefully have a plan that we can move forward from that meeting to perhaps a workshop to get down into the very fine details regarding the design and hopefully, from our perspective, moving forward towards an approval.
How many nights would it take for you to present this?
I think we can do it in one night, Mr. Chair. It may be a long one, but I think we can do it all in one.
And that would be followed by supplementary peer reviews by the town's peer review consultants?
That would be the idea. Yeah.
And what would you say to the fact that 180 days from December 10th is June 8th? And we're going to be bumping up against that if we do what you just proposed.
My calendar here. I would acknowledge that, Mr. Chair. I think it certainly does take some time.
I appreciate you acknowledging it, but I'm concerned about rushing a decision with a hearing that at that point will be. I mean, we may not close the hearing until the beginning of June.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, what I was about to say was the previous time this topic came up, I said I didn't think it was an appropriate time to talk about extensions.
I remember that.
At this point, I would say that I think it is an appropriate time to talk about that. So I agree with you, Mr. Chair, that the process of putting together the final decision will itself take some time and working with the members and with Judy Barrett. So at this point, I think we would be agreeable to an extension. What's today, the 2nd, to put us to the 24th, put us out for 4-week extension. Would that be agreeable?
Why don't we do this? You're going in the right direction. Why don't we do this? When you come back to the board on the 24th, we can reschedule a series of dates to try to advance this matter consistent with the way we've done this in the past. So what I hear you saying is you'd like to postpone, well, let me say this so everybody understands. We have secured with the town's assistance the next many Wednesdays to continue to conduct this hearing. Wednesday night will be our hearing. And for those in the audience who are following the other 40Bs have their own nights. And I don't remember off the top of my head which 40Bs have which nights, but that's all publicly available information, so that conceivably, if somebody was interested in a hearing, they would be able to follow all of them. So we'll postpone we'll cancel the 10th and the 17th. We'll meet on the 24th, and then potentially as many Wednesdays thereafter as it will take to conclude the matter. But it will include a presentation by I'm sorry, not you, Mr. Schomer, but the applicant's team, consistent with what we've seen. It will include a peer review. It will include a public comment period, and it will include testimony from the town officials who have testified before, as well as hearing from the Milton Planning Board and the Historical Commission. So that may take some time. And on the 24th, I'd like to take some time to anticipate what that might look like. So I'd appreciate your feedback on that. In addition, I'd like you to give some thought to the waivers that you would specifically seek from the town's bylaws. Now, I know the application has several pages of waivers. It would be good to fine tune that in light of what we're looking at now. And you and I spoke at one of the site hearings about my own personal concern about some of the waivers, and that they sound in safety. So that, I think, is going to be a very difficult thing for this board to consider. So we'll want to fine tune those to the extent you can. And we'd like to have a session on that. And we'll probably also have some questions at some point about how the finances of this program work. So just to give you a little peek at what I think you could expect, and I'll pledge on behalf of the board to fully cooperate with you in advancing this forward. But we're going to need, and we're going to want and seek participation by the folks who've taken their time so far in this hearing, which includes, of course, all of the abutters along Robbins and Meeting House and Alfred and Blue Hill Avenue and Vose Hill Lane, et cetera. So whose time we very much appreciate, and of course the town officials who've also given our town time. Does that sound okay, Mr. Schomer?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chair. And as to the issue of the waiver list, I should have mentioned that will be an updated waiver list will be included in the filings that we make in advance of the 24th. That presumably will have to change significantly based on the redesign of the project. I'll have to take a look at that and get into the specific dimensional waivers that we're requesting. As to the waivers that you and I spoke about on the site walk, Mr. Chair, as I believe I mentioned, primarily those are what I would describe as process waivers, where there's a separate permitting process in the town bylaws. But I've spoken with our engineer, and I believe a great number of those that I believe you're concerned about will be able to be withdrawn in the final application and our local bylaws that we are willing to comply with.
Yeah, that would be terrific. I appreciate your attention to that detail.
I think we can trim that down and simplify it quite a bit.
And we'll be seeing that prior to the 24th.
Correct.
And for the people who are listening, they'll be expecting to see a revised set of drawings or whatever, revised, not a full application, but something that will permit people to spend some time and see what they're looking at so that they can prepare for the 24th. You'll make your presentation on the 24th. We'll schedule some more hearings on the following several Wednesdays, and we'll be back in business. Is that what people can expect from the applicant?
Exactly.
Okay, let me say that I think it would be advisable to spend a fair bit of time on the drainage and water issues. And I also think we should anticipate a site walk. We promised the neighbors that, and I'm mindful of Mr. Gallagher's letter. Several of the participants have commented on the water. So at some point, as the weather gets better, I think it would be good to get out there and see the site and walk the site. The McGraths, I think, have asked for that as well. So it's just something to think about. Okay.
Fair enough.
Let me ask the members of the board if they've got any other questions of the applicant or anything they'd like to share tonight before we close for the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nothing from me.
Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be happy to spend my Wednesdays with you for the foreseeable future.
That was one of my goals, Mr. O'Brien. I hadn't seen you enough, and to speak to before we recess the hearing for the evening.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just a comment. I'm hearing some kind of a sense of sort of positive. This is it is going in a right direction, and I think that's helpful. But I guess before the applicant goes and spends a lot of time and frankly money on revised plans that sort of mimic what we're seeing here as a schematic, I think it would be helpful to the applicant to get some direction from the board about whether overall, in general, the kind of scale of what you're seeing here is what is kind of what you're hoping to see, or if you still have concerns about the scale of these buildings. Because I'm thinking about some of the comments that have been made tonight, and I'm not sure that just taking this plan and now developing it into more, revised plans for the board to review on the 24th, I'm a little concerned that we're going to get there, and then there's still going to be concerns about a shadow impact on the garden and, the sort of historic building being kind of here. But is this really a nod to the building, or is this really more a step toward preservation? And, I just think maybe some direction to the applicant about what this scale means for the preservation objectives of the town with this property would probably be helpful.
I think we've heard tonight preliminary indications is that the massing is still too large, Judy.
Okay, I just want the applicant to hear this.
Specifically made a comment that we call that red thing in the middle a mansion, and yet it looks very small. And we've also heard that the north building is potentially too large, and that it makes what it is an interesting design feature in the courtyard somewhat constrained and perhaps not as functional. And we heard concerns about the building on the west side of the site, potentially, hurting the gardens that people are taking so much effort to protect. So I think the consensus, and I think the feedback that the applicant should be getting is that there are still concerns about the massing, and that may mean units, but I don't know that.
Right.
I expressed some additional concerns that it still looks like a lot of the site is impervious, and I have concerns about the water and sewer issues that we've heard, which I think they're built into it's a built-in problem given the topography that we're working with, not just with the site, but with the fact that this hill begins several hundred yards further west up on the top of Brush Hill. So there's a real challenge there that I think that remains to be achieved. And to me, it's not as much about the number of units, but it's about the overall density of the site, because the density of the site continues to contribute to the water problem, not just some of the design features about which we heard our architectural peer reviewers speak. So that's my sense, Judy.
And I didn't mean
as one board member.
I wasn't going to density or units. I was talking about the intensity of use on the site.
Yeah.
And the relationship of the proposed buildings to the objects of preservation that are really the intent, I think, of the town. If something's going to happen on this site, that the priority is the preservation. And how do these structures actually get you there? I'm not sure they do. So I just wanted to make sure it was clear of the concerns, that we're not walking out of here tonight with people feeling like, okay, we're going in the right direction, let's just take this and run with it. That I think there's some more thought that needs to be given to these buildings.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that should be the message. I will say, compared to the initial application this is a big step forward.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that says a lot about the initial application. And I think we've heard board, Mr. Bowman's concerns from the town, et cetera. So without having more time to study it, I mean, I don't know that we can add more right now
That's fine.
on that.
Okay.
Do my fellow board members have anything they want to add to that?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I just want to echo your comments, and I would characterize this as better. As the applicant has reminded me and reminded the board, as have others, this is an iterative process, and I look at this as the beginning of the second stage of this review. The first stage produced a basic consensus that the initial proposal was not going to fly, to be blunt. This one is moving in the right direction. I think the applicant deserves credit for imagination, for innovation, for moving forward and listening to the neighbors and to the town officials. Are we there yet? Probably not. Is there reason to hope that we're going to get to a project that will satisfy the vast majority of people? Yeah, I think there is, but we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of issues to solve. Some of them are technical, some of them are design, some of them are unique to the site, but I agree with the comments from the chair regarding where we are on this.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Ms. Jaffer?
I'm in agreement. I think that, as I said at the start, I need some time to digest the plan, but I'm an optimist, and so I'm excited about what we have now, because at some point it seemed like preservation was an impossibility, and now it's a possibility. So I'm excited about that, and I want to give it some more thought. And I think that sort of that not only is the plan headed in the right direction, but we are appreciative of the applicants', I think, sincere efforts, and look forward to see what comes next in response to a lot of the good comments this evening, especially from Ms. Lyons and Mr. Bomer.
Thank you. Before I recess the hearing, I see Mr. Donahue has raised his hand. Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes, thank you very much. And again, very encouraged by what we've seen. But echoing what the board has said, I think that going forward, that circumferential driveway around the back of the entire new thing is one of the storm water drainage problems, and that in reworking some of the plans, if you can reduce the amount of paving and the road that's in the back, it seems as if the entrance in and out of the north building is from the north side. I'm a little, not being an architect, not realizing why you need this big circumferential driveway around the back of the property with all the parking spaces that are there. Just a comment, and thank you very much. And I know going forward, we'll get some good additional feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me thank Mr. Hill.
Mr. Chairman, if I may make just a couple quick comments with respect to the process. If we could ask that the applicant file these new plans that they're going to produce at least a few days in advance of the March.
He said that he would. He said that he would.
Okay, that would be appreciated. And is it possible to have this presentation filed with the zoning board as well, so we can see a copy of it?
This presentation will be on the website in the morning.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just briefly to respond to the comments that the board members have just made, if I may. We've, as I said at the outset of our presentation, we took a hard look at this project and we made some pretty serious cuts. A 22% reduction in the number of units and impervious parking spaces is, in my view, a very credible reduction. And we look forward to the opportunity to present the specifics of this to hopefully bring the board members to a level of comfortableness that the site can support this. And I have no lack of confidence in D'Artagnan's ability to do that, and Jim Burke's ability to do that in terms of the drainage, and also our traffic engineer. What I will say is that the broad strokes of our project redesign are as the board is seeing tonight. I don't foresee major revisions or major reductions to this at this point. However, we do look forward to the opportunity to convince the board members that the site can sustain this. I have no doubt of that. And I hope that our engineer and our architects will be able to bring the board members to that same level of comfort that I have.
Thank you, Mr. Schomer. I see Ms. McGrath has raised her hand.
Hi, good evening. It's Amy McGrath from 176 Robbins Street. With all due respect to the applicant's attorney and other consultants, what I'm hearing in what Mr. Schumer just said is we Town of Milton and we Board of Appeals should be giving credit for this 22% reduction in density when the first plan that was served up to the town was so outrageous in its density. So I very much respect that you have, come back and have heard people about the mansion and the gardens when you told before that it was impossible to do so. But I'm also going to say that I do not give any credit to the 22% reduction. I mean, anyone can show up and, put something forth. And that the first proposal in my mind was not the start. This is the start.
Thank you, Ms. McGrath. Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard before we recess the hearing for the evening? Okay, let me then, I'm going to recess this.
Picton.
I'm sorry? Ms. McGrath?
Sorry, I was talking to my husband about something
Okay, thank you.
Unrelated.
Thank you for your comments. All right, we'll recess this hearing until 7 o'clock on Wednesday, March 24th, at which time we'll see a revised presentation from the applicant, and we'll be in receipt of the applicant's revised plans. Mr. Schomer, could you please arrange for this presentation to be submitted to Ms. Sutton for posting on the website in the AM?
Yes, Mr. Chair. As soon as we conclude, I will email it to her right away.
Thank you very much. Good night, all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.